Thanks everybody for joining today. This is Blair from the Bootstrapped Entrepreneur. I've got Corbett Barr here with me. Say hello, Corbett.
Hi, Blair. Thanks for having me on.
That's great. So Corbett, for those of you who don't know about him, I've talked a bit about him on the blog here, but he's a bit of a blogging idol, so to speak, of mine, but also someone who I've followed along and been through some of his courses with both Traffic School and Startup Blog That Matters. So I've invited him here today as sort of my first official interview for the blog to chat a bit about his experience. So Corbett, maybe for the benefit of the audience here, you can tell me a little bit about who you are, and when people ask you the million-dollar question, so Corbett, what do you do? Maybe you can fill us in with the answer.
All right, maybe we can work that out because I still don't know exactly what I should say when somebody asks me what I do. Sometimes I say that I'm a blogger, and that is certainly true. I run a couple of blogs and have spent the past 3.5 years blogging. I just looked recently. Actually, we've published about 600 articles in the past 3.5 years. I didn't write them all, but so certainly I am a blogger. But I think a blog is actually just a great platform and a good way to reach an audience. And really, that's what I use it for. I have an underlying business which is focused on teaching people about entrepreneurship and marketing. And the blog is just a way to demonstrate our expertise and to reach out and reach people. So my main vehicle is called Think Traffic, and that's a website that has about 400 free articles on it, all about how to attract an audience online.
Right on, right on. So, Think Traffic's a pretty popular blog. It's obviously taking a while to get there. Maybe you can backtrack a little bit and tell us a bit about how you got started, both with Think Traffic and maybe, I think previously you might have been an entrepreneur in a few other lives. So maybe tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So I've been self-employed for about 6 years now. And for the first 3 years of that, I actually did sort of a traditional, if I can say traditional, startup in Silicon Valley, which means you build some software, a prototype, shop it around to venture capitalists, try to raise investment, and then basically try to grow it really quickly so that you can eventually sell the company or go IPO or something like that. So I did sort of that traditional startup world, and we worked pretty hard on it for about 3 years. And then in 2008, if you recall, the financial world collapsed and everybody thought the sky was falling. And it was pretty difficult to raise additional funds at that point, and we didn't have enough revenue to keep the company going. And also, my life as an entrepreneur didn't end up exactly how I thought it would. I think I always felt like I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I didn't exactly examine why I wanted to do that. And so I kind of fell into everyone's vision of what an entrepreneur should be: someone who spends 18 hours at the office, sleeping under his desk, and builds up, a lot of employees and investors, board of advisor, all that kind of stuff. And I found that ultimately I ended up feeling like I had less freedom and control over my life and my lifestyle than I did when I was working in a corporate job before. So for me, in 2008, when we couldn't keep the company together entirely, I decided to take a step back and actually take a sabbatical and reevaluate what I wanted from my life and my career. And so we traveled to Mexico, my wife and I, for about a 9-month trip. Six of that was Mexico, and the rest of the time we drove around the US and Canada. And really, I wanted to hit the reset button and just sort of ponder what I wanted to do next. And while we were on that trip, I ended up starting a blog, and this was in early 2009. I ended up starting a blog basically because we met a lot of people on the trip who weren't rich or retired, but somehow had figured out ways to live really interesting lives and to travel and live in foreign countries, despite having to work still. And this kind of blew my mind because I thought that there were basically two ways: either you worked for a corporate job and tried to climb the ladder and maybe retire early and get weeks of vacation a year, or you were an entrepreneur hoping to get rich. And this was kind of a third sort of option that I hadn't been aware of. So I started the blog basically to chronicle that trip, to share those stories of people that we were meeting, and also basically to start asking myself and others hard questions about what it means to be an entrepreneur and how our lives and careers can better integrate. And that's when I started blogging, and one thing led to another. And now I've been, for the past 3.5 years, running my own small business. And since then, we've been traveling a lot. Actually, about 50% of the past 3.5 years we've spent on the road. We go back to Mexico every winter, and just really my view of entrepreneurship has changed because of that trip.
That's cool. So, because this blog is a lot about bootstrapping and starting a business with little to no money, maybe can you share with us a little bit about your funding situation? Did you start off with your own money, or did you seek any outside investment along the way?
Yeah, so in my last business, we ended up raising about $3 million from venture capitalists, and that was a whole different sort of experience. This time around, I decided to do everything myself, and I really wanted to make sure that I retained control and creative vision, all of the options that I could possibly have with this business. So I decided to bootstrap it, and that meant for the first year or so, I didn't have a whole lot of revenue coming in, and essentially had to live off of savings and also get really creative about cutting costs. So while we were on the road trip, spending a lot of time in Mexico, we were actually able to live for about half of what we would normally spend while living in the United States. So for a good portion of that, I was able to sort of reduce costs and then bootstrap the business slowly. You know, it's like getting a fire going. You have working on it, blowing on it, and hoping that it takes off. And eventually, it did. So, but you know, there's a lot of psychological issues with bootstrapping and spending your savings, and you know, of course, I had to go through that emotional roller coaster that entrepreneurs do.
Right. So going through that experience, what would you say has been the highlight for you so far? The best part about being sort of a bootstrapped entrepreneur?
The best part, I think, is really getting to decide every day, every month, what I take on, what direction my business takes, you know, what I want to pursue, basically, and also how I do it. That's a big part for me. It's not just, you know, building a business, but also how are you building a business, and what are the reasons why? What's the big picture? And for me, the big picture is that, you know, to be honest, building a business has a lot of risk, and you don't know, you know, in a year from now if you're still going to have a business, and you certainly don't know if the business is going to turn into something that makes you wealthy, right? I think business owners, maybe in the back of our heads, think that, you know, eventually being an entrepreneur can lead to wealth, but the fact is that you don't know what's going to happen. So this round, I wanted to build something that really allows me to enjoy the journey as much as possible and not focus solely on a destination of building something that's really huge that eventually you can sell. Instead, let's build something that, sure, maybe one day can be big and important, but also do it in a way that benefits me, my customers, my employees, my spouse, everyone that's sort of a stakeholder in this business in a really great way along the journey, so that it's not just about putting in countless 18-hour days and hoping to end up with something at the end of it.
Right. No get rich quick scheme here. Okay, cool. So, you know, you talked a little bit about what's good. Is there anything you regret about missing corporate life, or that you wish you would done differently as an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question about it. I think being an entrepreneur is a much harder path. In the corporate world, there's sort of this daily struggle about, you know, dragging yourself to work every day, doing the commute, wondering, you know, how you ended up with this life that isn't what you pictured. But on the other hand, there you have camaraderie and a lot of people around, friends, that sort of thing. There's a safety net, you know, never having to worry about whether or not you're going to get paid. I mean, of course, you may lose your job, but there's probably another job there that you could find. With being an entrepreneur, there's a heck of a lot more stress that goes into it, and I definitely, for a while, didn't cope with that stress very well, especially the first time around. The first time that I left my corporate job about 6 years ago, we had to essentially build a prototype in order to get investment, and that took us the better part of a year. So I lived without a salary for the better part of a year building that and shopping to investors. And I wasn't really prepared for the stress involved and all of the questions that you get not only from yourself but also everybody, you know, your friends and family and spouse. And so I do regret not being better prepared for that stress and that emotional roller coaster. And you know, eventually it worked out fine, and I'm glad that I stuck with it. But it certainly wasn't you know, the most fun to go through.
Got it. So, you know, for every successful startup, sounds like you've had a lot of success. You've also gone through the sort of crash and burn sort of thing. Is there any sort of success stories or role models that you look up to that help keep you motivated and help you keep going?
Yeah, definitely. You know, I think that in the previous world, when I was just trying to build this thing, you know, that build this thing really big, really fast using investment money, I did a lot of role models. I didn't really look into. It just seemed like some people sort of got lucky and they ended up with a big. And so in the in between time and since then, I've really spent a lot of time reading and studying different entrepreneurs and different styles of entrepreneurship. And recently, I've come to respect a whole lot of people, actually. One is the company called 37 Signals that's run by Jason Fried. They have a couple of books, and they have a really fantastic blog. A lot of bootstrapping companies and the lifestyle issues involved. That's a great resource. Another one is The Lean Startup by Eric, really fantastic book, just about making sure that you eliminate the biggest risk of creating a business, which is that you're working on something that no one is going to want ultimately. Getting that question out of the way as soon as possible. And then there are a number of people involved in the blogging world that I look up to. People like Chris Gillibo, who runs the Conformity. He's built a really fantastic following and a really great business. He's actually a one-person shop still. He doesn't have any employees. Incredible, assortment of products, and he has a following that now attends this World Domination Summit. 1,000 people a year show up in Portland, and he's really essentially a one-person company, which is pretty incredible. Another person is Leo Babauta, who runs Zen. I spent a lot of time talking with Leo about business, and he has a really fresh take on the philosophies behind it as well. So I've kind of borrowed from different people and built this, in a way that has made me feel a lot better about it this time around.
Right, right. That's cool. That's cool. So, you've been a successful blogger, successful entrepreneur. You live kind of all over the world, travel the world, work from anywhere you want. What can you give us a little bit of glimpse of what a day in the life of Corbett looks like?
Yeah, so it really depends. There are kind of, I'd say there are like three modes. So the first mode is what you're looking at right now. I'm in San Francisco. This is my home base. We spend about 50% of our time here, about half here. And when I'm here, life is sort of typical. I mean, aside from the fact that I work at home, we have, a regular group of friends here. And I sort of get in a regular work week groove because the people that were around tend to work Monday to Friday and kind of get, take on that groove as well. The second mode is when we're in Mexico and we spend about 3 months there every year in the wintertime. I do. We have a regular internet connection and we live in one place. We return to the same town every year. But while we're there, life is quite a bit different because the distinction between during the week and weekends is totally gone. I tend to like to surf as much as possible while we're there. So I try to get out during the morning or afternoons or whatever. And my workday just becomes a lot more fragmented. It's not as if I spend, a regular number of hours working. A lot of times I'll start the day going on a little surf trip. I'll come back, get a couple of hours in, and then we often have visitors or friends coming over that I'll spend time going to lunch with and that sort of thing. So I get my workday in when I can. Sometimes that means that I work late at night, and that's fine with me. I actually tend to work pretty well at night, so it ends up being split up for those 3 months. And there's another mode which is traveling in general. So, for example, last summer, about 2 months traveling around Europe. And while I was doing that, I tended to, again, break up the workday quite a bit. My wife and I would wake up and have breakfast together, and then maybe I would get an hour or so in, but then we would get off and do some exploring, whatever city we were in, and then maybe in the afternoon during our downtime, get a couple of hours of work in, and then again in the evening, get a couple of hours of work in. So, it kind of depends on where we are. The beauty is, like you said, as long as internet connection, um, I'm able to plug in and get some work done. If there's a big project that I'm working on, then I tend to try to squeeze it in while we're in somewhere that's a little bit more stable, like San Francisco.
Right, right. That's cool. That's really cool. So you've been working a lot on, speaking of projects, you've got just recently launched a bit of a mini project of a migration over from your personal blog, Corbett.com, or CorbettBarr.com to thinktraffic.net. There's rumors you got another project in the works coming out later this month. We've all been waiting to hear about. But I think it's a great idea. But maybe you can tell us a little bit more about this change and what you think will come of it for Things Traffic.
Yeah, so the first blog I started was the blog that was at most recently at CorbettBarr.com, and that was the blog that I started on the sabbatical that I mentioned, and that's the longest running blog. It was 3.5 years old, and then about a year into it, I decided to start Think Traffic because I wanted to focus a little bit more on business issues and less lifestyle issues, and really try to find a problem that a lot of people had and try to solve that for them and build a business around that. And so Think Traffic is really, it tries to answer the question, why are some sites massively popular while a lot of other sites go pretty much unnoticed? We try to teach people how to build an audience online. But the longest time, ever since I started Think Traffic, I felt as though there was a bit of a conflict because I did talk about business issues a little bit on my other blog. And I also sometimes wanted to talk about lifestyle issues at Think Traffic. So for 18 months or so, I had this in the back of my mind that it would be nice to merge the two, but I just never had the guts or never made the decision to actually pull the trigger. And recently, because we're working on this big new project, and because I just had felt pulled in a lot of different directions, I wanted to really focus in, and I decided to merge the two blogs. So that essentially means that I took the archives, the old posts, I went through the best posts and merged them into Think Traffic. And now it's really one site. So what you'll find there are archives that are combined from the two sites. But that means that now we're going to be talking a little bit more about some of the lifestyle issues, some of the big picture issues, the big reason why. Why are we entrepreneurs? To the how-to information at Think Traffic, and so far people seem to be really enjoying it, and I'm hopeful that it's going to create a greater synergy and lead to an even more popular site in the future.
Yeah. Well, I've been a fan of both for years, and it's easier now to come to one spot and get it all at once. So I love it. It'll be great. So Corbett, thanks again. You were gracious enough to give me a quote when I launched the Bootstrapped Entrepreneur a few weeks back. And the quote you talked about was a bit about focusing on building a audience first before you have a product. For those entrepreneurs that are just starting out, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how to get an audience or how to create an audience to get them ripe and ready for that product.
Yeah, so this again, this kind of goes back to we mentioned earlier this idea that one of the biggest risks you have as an entrepreneur is building something that ultimately no one wants. Some companies work for a year or 2 years before they launch their first product, and the hope is that all of their research and all of their thinking behind the product results in something that there is demand for. The opposite of that is actually finding the demand before you build the product. And to do that essentially is by choosing a topic that you're interested in and you think that there are problems to be solved in, and to create a blog or some format of content. It doesn't have to be a blog, it could be videos, it could be ebooks, all kinds of different things. Essentially, you start to interact with people around this topic and start to have conversations with them. The blog is a great format because you can get comments from people and start talking about different issues, maybe that you have personal experience with and that other people may need solutions to. And just start to test the waters, essentially. Start to talk about, so for example, with the bootstrapped entrepreneur, you can start to have this conversation with people about bootstrapping and why it's important and who wants to do it and what the with bootstrapping. And ultimately out of that, if you grow a following around that, it's a demonstration that there's some demand. And then ultimately you can ask those people, what it is that they have potentially help with. And then you can develop products and services and other things that can actually solve those problems. And that hopefully takes some of the risk out of building the business in the first place.
Totally, it's totally the path I'm trying to take. So that's great. I appreciate the confirmation there. So you talked a little bit about your experience bootstrapping before and some of the savings tips you had and kind of cutting back expenses, living sort of within your means. Do you have any sort of, you're still obviously a small business owner and whatnot. Do you have any sort of hacks or favorite DIY tips or tools that you use on a daily basis that you could recommend for other entrepreneurs?
Well, in the on the bigger scheme of things, I'm a big fan of moving somewhere that is less expensive. I mean, it's live. I love San Francisco and I love being here, but the fact is, it's really expensive, and you're high when you're here. And another thing is that when you're getting started, a lot of times you're around your old influences in life, your friends, your family, the people who expect you just to be a normal person, right? And crazy ideas like becoming an entrepreneur. Not a bad idea to actually relocate for a while and live somewhere that's less expensive, and where you can get away from all of those influences and really just be, completely dedicated to getting your startup off the ground, because it takes a massive amount of effort in the beginning, at least, to find that direction, to find that audience, to build the first product. Distractions, and the lower your costs, I think the more chance you have of success in the future. And then the other thing is just to, honestly sit down, list every expense that you have, and be honest with yourself about what's important. Do you really need a car payment, or could you pay cash for something, or could you just use a zip car or walk? And do you need cable? Is that just a distraction because you should really be time, precious extra time that you have with your friends and family, and the rest of the time thinking about your business. So be honest with yourself and go through those expenses and cut out everything that you can. And that's something that I tend to do every couple of months, review expenses and cut out the things that have crept in that aren't really essential.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's great. Yeah, I did the cable trick a few months back, and it's definitely been helping a lot from a distraction perspective. So that's great. Cool. Well, Corbett, one last question here for you. Just going to pull out an oldie but a goodie post from the 37 Things I Never Told You. I don't know if you remember that post. I picked it up again in the archives the other day. But anything else in your experience since then that we should know about you that's come up?
You should know about me.
Any fun factoids?
Didn't I share like way too much information?
It was quite a bit. I'm not gonna lie, but it was good. It definitely brought out the human side, and I think that's probably what attracted me as a follower in the first place. Is being that sort of real, authentic person. So it was great. It was funny.
That I don't know if I shared in that post that actually I've reflected on a couple of times is that in high school I was the managing editor of the newspaper at the school. Thinking back on it, there are a lot of things that I learned from that originally about writing, about publishing, a publication on a monthly basis, about finding advertisers and that sort of thing, and those things I think really have shaped my thoughts about blogging, and I do call on that sort of stuff from the past once in a while. So I don't know if people are watching this and there was something that you did in school, in college, or in high school connected with, maybe there's a way to draw on that experience and use it to your advantage.
Very cool. There's number 34.
Great.
Cool. Well, Corbett, I really appreciate you taking the time today. I know you're a busy guy. You got a lot of stuff going on, but I really thank you for your time, and the audience here at Boost Entrepreneur. Thanks you and some of the inspiration, hopefully, that you've inspired me by. I'm passing along. And for those of you who haven't checked out Corbett's site yet, go check out thinktraffic.net and stay tuned for more goodness coming in the coming weeks.
Thanks for having me on, Blair. And bootstrapping is so important. I wish you the best of luck.
All right. Thanks, Corbett. Take it easy.